So I'd like to invite into the room Avi and Brook. Avi, how you doing? We
Great.
good?
How you guys doing?
Fantastic. Hi, Brook. How you doing?
You know, I'll just say, Avi, we have to stop meeting like this and actually meet
It's just,
face-to-face. It's been years we've been meeting like this, literally.
it's such a pleasure to see you, man. Any time of day is good.
Oh, I feel the same way, And so I'm so lucky that I get to go on with you. Now, I will say to anybody who's been through several hours of this dialogue, I was here before, so I'm not going to waste any time trying to say, yeah, this is who I am. Maybe Avi wants to.
Brook is just a
Sure,
legend.
I could talk about Brook.
I think you do have to do like a 60-second intro, Brook, just because you are a legend in the industry. So just 60 seconds, and then we'll hand over to Avi, because people are coming in and coming out, so not everybody was on the first session.
Right, that's true, and that's the whole idea. Drop into what interests you, and I love that format. You know, it's not a webinar. We're not talking down to you. We're talking with you for all the listeners. I've been around a long time. I'm next year it will be 40 years in high tech. I've written lots of commercial code down to the system level, and I used to write TCP/IP stacks, which is why they asked me to take on the security. Because I mean, it was all about networks in 1998, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So I've been around a really long time. I was Cisco InfoSec's very first application security architect. There were lots of security architects there. There was a fantastic crew, but I was the application person, which they pitched at me as kind of I know you're doing something really super important and interesting, but we need this other role filled in, and I know it's kind of lesser, but would you take it? Seriously, because it wasn't all that important in 2001, early 2001, late 2000. So yeah, I've been around a long time, written a bunch of books. You have to decide whether the books are any good. People keep inviting me to speak at conferences, and so if I can be of help, if I can be of use, I think that's
Keynoting at Global AppSec DC in October.
Yes, that is true.
Gotta throw that out there.
The amazing 𝗕ciecie𝗸𝗁. And I'm not afraid to get on stage and maybe poke at a few things. So, you know, it may be slightly uncomfortable for some of you, and that's what I get for being a little older and having been around a long time. I get to poke at things. So I think that's probably the enough introduction. Avi,
over to you. Go ahead.
My turn to talk about Brook. So Brook is Brook is the legend that legends grew up learning about. Literally, the people that when I grew up into security, reading the books and the people, and I found out they learned from Brook. He's the guy that wrote the books that taught the people that I learned from. So yeah, he's the legend that legends grew up learning. So he really is. I don't think you meant me to talk about Brook though.
So would be great, and then we'll get into the topic of the webinar. So yeah.
Okay, I'm not as much of a legend as Brook. I run a small boutique consultancy called Bounce Security. I mean, you could tell from the stripes, ticker stripes. I'm also on the board of directors of OWASP, hence pushing the OWASP conference. I also help run the Israel chapter of OWASP, a couple of projects. We actually have a great AppSec Israel conference coming up next month. If anybody wants an excuse to come to Tel Aviv, that's the perfect time for it. I'm done chilling.
Well, I've never been, but it's actually on my list. Beautiful beaches. Okay, but let's get into the topic, right? So, as we discussed earlier, we talked about why we needed a new AppSec maturity model. Book opened us up with that. We then talked about metrics. Tanya kind of led a great session there. Now we're talking about the attributes of a modern application security model. So let's kick off by saying, what are the three areas that define how mature an organization is? And I'm picking three. We are developing the model at Brook, and I know there's like 12, but let's just pick on three. What are the top three? So, and Avi, let's get your perspective first, and then we'll kind of switch over to Brook.
All right. So I see a few aspects, and I work with a lot of teams building out their processes and SDLC and AppSec programs, and everybody has a different name for it, right? But number one is consistency and flexibility, and that's one thing, right? Because it's not the organization. Each team is going to be working differently. I'm working now with an organization. They have 12 teams and about 15 different ways of filing things in Jira, right? Each team does this differently in the same team. So on the one hand, you need to be consistent across the board. On the other hand, you need to be flexible for the way the teams are working. This doesn't conflict. It's just a different level of abstraction, right? We want to do the same thing. How you do it, however you do it is fine, as long as you do all the things, as long as you go through the same process and the same.
Right. And that's the thing. As long as you do it, how you achieve the goal is fine. It's just that as long as you are achieving the goal. Yeah. Okay.
Right. I mean, and one example of that, I think Russell mentioned about SAST, right? You need to have SAST. Some teams in the same company, you'll have multiple different SAST tools, right? And SAST isn't even the goal, right? I mean, there's different ways of achieving the same result, right? One team wants to hire a consultant to work 48 hours a day to review every code manually. Fine, not optimal, but whatever works for you. So it's consistent at the goals, but flexible with the implementation, right? Yeah. The other one, the next thing I would say is being responsive to changes and incidents and bugs, being responsive to things, basically being agile, right? But the process can't be brittle either, right? So you need to be responsive and change, and the process itself needs to change over time as well, right? And a really mature AppSec program will change inherently over time at different speeds for different teams, right? And the last thing that I would say is around efficiency. Okay, a very mature AppSec program is not wasting time doing things you don't need to do, right? And you need to have high-level buy-in to re-architect and re-engineer the development processes for that. Yeah. So it's kind of two sides to that coin.
Yeah, and the couple of points that you made there that I think we can pull a little bit deeper is like, it's not the same for every organization. You need to recognize that it's going to evolve as you go through the maturity. And Brook, this is obviously an area where we've been spending a lot of time as we've been building out the maturity program. Kind of like, where do you, because I know you work with a lot of startups right now, is like, where do you view some of those quick wins? How do you get somebody up and going? How do you get them kind of like moving through the model? Where do you get them started?
Right. And that's really important. And that's maybe one of the reasons I'm keen to at least revise what we've got. There's kind of an assumption written into some of the big ones like BSIM, Building Security in Maturity Model, or SAM, I forget what SAM stands for, both fine models, by the way, is that they're for big companies. And you said it, Avi, flexibility. How do you do this stuff when you haven't got a central security team? You don't even have a central security expert. You don't. And you haven't got $50,000 for a static analysis. That's when he said SAST, Avi meant static analysis for those who don't know the acronym SAST. I'm really keen on that. I break down acronyms so that people know what we're talking about. And static analysis is you look at the code, the actual source code, or the binary, and say, are there any security bugs in there? Just to put it bluntly. So, how do you get that when you can't afford $1 million purchase of one of the biggies, the big commercial tools? You can't even afford a $50,000 server, which I happen to know one of my favorite SAST requires. Where do you go? What do you do? Luckily, we're in a really rich time. We're in a really rich time because you don't have to forego. And I'm sorry that lots of people don't understand this, but you don't have to forego the tooling or just say, yeah, I'll hire a consultant or my developers who know a little bit will do the best they can. There are some open source tools which OWASP is supplying that can go a long way here. Yeah, maybe in some areas, they're better than the commercial tools. In other ways, they're not.
Mhm.
That's a matter of pilot and analysis, which you can always do, or hire a consultant like Avi or me to help you with. I'm not pitching anything. I'm just saying, that there are consultants who are happy to take your money, and they're out there. But the point I'm making is you don't have to forego. Luckily, we're living in this rich time where there's stuff out there that you can get started. That's what we do with the startups. Actually, we get them started with something. Yeah, maybe it's not perfect, but it's something. And you start down the journey. Speaking of an AppSec maturity journey, you start down the journey. Maria, I think it was Maria much earlier today, said something about, you've got to start with some kind of testing analysis. Yeah, you do. And probably it should be in the heart. What I wrote in core software security was there's a heart, if you will, of the system of software security, which is trying to get the bugs that you can find. And none of these tools are perfect, by the way. That's a whole nother conversation. But if you get started, that's the place. That's the place. And then, other people have mentioned design. Do something. But I did want to touch on one thing Avi said, because a lot of people don't seem to realize this. We are always creating models that flatten out a process which is not flat and not linear today. Software building is not a flat. Even if you looked at the DevOps infinity symbol, it's still a progression. And while a piece of code might take a progression, lots of teams, as you said, Avi, might say, I'll code a little, then I'll design a little, because now I learned something from trying the code, and now I know how it works. So now I can do some design. Now I'll code a little more. Oh, I learned something. Let's go back to design. And design, coding, testing are all happening at the same time in parallel. And that's something that the flat models, the linear models are just not dealing with today.
You bring up a really good point, and it reinforces something that Avi was talking about a moment ago as well, is that, what you're talking about here is you're going iteratively. Just start somewhere, get a little bit, define some of the process, move forward, define some more of the process, and kind of layer in it from there. And as you point out, there's some great open source tools out there from the group at OWASP. There are some great tools that are just available just to plug straight into a GitHub pipeline, for example, and click and go. Very low friction, very low cost. And I was in the static application security testing market for a number of years. I have the war wounds. So I know that those open source tools are a lot more noisy than the commercial ones, but the barrier to entry is much, much lower. So you've got this trade-off, and maybe for some teams it's okay, right? Say, okay, some teams I'm going to use OWASP dependency check because it's going to give me sufficient source composition analysis of my open source components. See what I'm doing, Brook? I'm describing what I'm talking about so that the folks get it. You taught me well on that one. But being able to get me good enough, and then maybe with my commercial or my front end applications or something that's more of a business risk, I need to go with a commercial oriented tool. So I think it's a really important point that you bring up there. And Avi, as you're working with different organizations, kind of where does the executive buy-in come? Because I think you can get going quickly, but then you can really overwhelm yourself with stuff really quick. And if you don't have I feel like if you don't have that executive buy-in and that future as to why we're doing this, you could very easily just get overwhelmed. What are your thoughts there?
So I think there's two big parts of this for that executive buy-in. And I just want to point out for the record, when I'm talking about buy-in, it's not just executive buy-in. You also need to buy-in from the front-end junior developers, absolutely, to do them the thing. But for executive buy-in, you need two things. To get started is easy. It's not going to take a lot of overhead. Executive, yeah, sure, let's pay lip service and get started on that. That's the easy part. I'm not even talking about that, because things do take longer. We need buy-in, not just about budget, but about the fact that this AppSec program, at least at first, it will slow things down. We will have a lot more security bugs than we did before. I mean, we had them before, we just didn't know about them.
Now we just know they're there, yes.
Right, so we look at it. So now we're spending a lot more time and getting worse. How is this even possible? So we need buy-in for the long-term for the long haul, right? And then once we get, in the mid-range of that long haul, then we're going to start wanting to spend more budget, whether it's actual, financial budget or more additional time to actually upgrade our process and get to a better, more mature level. So those are the two things. And they need to know about this upfront. If they don't know what they're getting into, they're going to be in for a painful ride, because all of a sudden, wait, I thought we'd be done in 2 months, $5,000 and that's it. And what is this all of a sudden? It's getting worse.
Yeah, there's actually one of the things that I often see with, because you talk about buy-in, right? Not just the executives, you have to get the whole development organization to buy in on this. And sometimes when like, hey, we just fixed a whole bunch of things, but my risk score meter didn't move very far. Well, yeah, because you're drowning in security debt right now. So you need to come up with a strategy for that debt and a strategy for how to kind of like manage it. But if you can believe it, that was 15 minutes. I think we went on a rather long Brook love fest. So, I really appreciate both of you very much for joining us today. Brook, I did want to double click and go into threat modeling. So, but do you want to just, I know that's like kind of like secure design is an area where it's like people don't do it. So, maybe, what we can do? Let's save that for when we do one of the podcasts. We'll go deep.
But let's because how startups approach that is really interesting. It's not that they don't do secure design, it's that they don't have enough knowledge to do it well enough. Not well, but well enough.
You know what? There's a lot of confusion about even what threat modeling is about. So yeah, and we misspelled an awful lot. So thank you both very much. Really, really appreciate your time. I hope you have a great RSA when you get to it. Hopefully we can meet up when we get that. So
that'll be grand.
Thanks a lot, folks.
Thank you very much for having me. You take care.